Stig Abell is the editor and publisher of the esteemed Times literary supplement. He presents Front Row, an arts magazine show on the equally esteemed Radio 4, and he pops up as a commentator in the British and US news media. Upon graduating from Cambridge University, he enjoyed a meteoric rise through the media industry to become director of the Press Complaints Commission in his early 20s and managing editor of the Sun newspaper in his early 30s. His ambitious and well-received book, How Britain Really Works, examines exactly what the title suggests. Stig, thank you. Give us your story then. You're from the Midlands originally, and you were the first generation to go to university?
Yeah, my mum, interestingly, actually went as a mature student to Loughborough, where we're from, university, but she didn't when she was younger. And my brother and I went to university. So I come from the sort of middling part of the country. I wrote a book this year, and I said there's a line from Bill Bryson where he talks about Des Moines in Iowa. I came from there, somebody had to. And I kind of, that's the beginning of my book about Britain. I came from Loughborough, somebody had to. And it's kind of an example of the very middle ground part of the country, really. And so my parents were from working class backgrounds, from the area, and then scraped and worked hard to become kind of comfortably middle class. But I'm very conscious of, my grandparents, when you used to visit them. My grandma lived in the council estate my dad grew up in, and you were never very far from that. So I kind of had one eye in either direction growing up. You were kind of very conscious of limitations and poverty, really, and you're also very aspirational because you kind of had this belief if you worked hard, there were other places you could get to.
But that's quite a hard thing to break through, isn't it? Because I've spoken to many people who came from, really difficult backgrounds, and there was no risk, really, no sort of cost to the risk of taking a punt on something. Whereas if you're living this very middle class life, it's actually quite a difficult thing to try to stand out and have that breakthrough.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, and that's why I think lots of people get disappointed and therefore get stuck. And lots of people in this country, and it's not even middle class. I think the problem with this country generally is when you get stuck. It's very good when it's mobile, when things move around. That's why I think in the end things like immigration are good. If you mix into the gene pool, you get change, you get movement, and things spark. That's really healthy. The danger in this country, and you see it in places like Loughborough, is people who've got stuck. Outside of London particularly, it's a massive geographical divide in this country, and I feel that very keenly. I go back to Loughborough very rarely, but when I do, it's a different country to London. So, but my mum worked hard. I went to a good school. I went to a good university. I went to Cambridge, and that was a place which I was dreading going. I nearly refused it in the way that idiotic 18-year-olds with sort of poorly considered principles do. I'm not going there. It's not for me. It's too posh. It's too. I'll never fit in. And actually what I found there was a whole bunch of people who were middle class or not, very ordinary backgrounds who'd got there by working hard. And actually I've found, and it's not entirely the case because I think it does discriminate a bit against working class people, it discriminates against people for colour. I think that seems to be evidentially the case. But it also, to me, demonstrated a bit of a meritocracy, because I met loads of people who were clever and had worked really hard from all sorts of backgrounds, many of whom were from state schools, sink state schools, which had no, where were very poor standards of learning. But it felt like a meritocracy. It felt like there were a lot of people there who'd worked very hard, and that was the moment I kind of felt options are open. It kind of felt like if you go to places like Loughborough, a lot of times you stay there. You don't consider going to London, you don't consider going anywhere else. That's where you're from, that's where you find a job, and you're often running. And kind of I found when I was 18, I thought, maybe there is a world elsewhere.
But the shame there is that people with your ability but didn't have the confidence to even apply, didn't have that opportunity. So what do you think made you push through and actually make the application and go there when others didn't?
I think, we had a great piece in the TLS, which I had from a woman called Stig Abell, she was this is in the 80s, she's from a little Welsh comprehensive, goes to Oxford, tries to get in, and feels completely shunned and put down. It feels like a sort of a strange public school place, and people are joking in Greek. And she goes into the interview room, and there's three people sitting there, one of whom's behind her. They don't introduce themselves to her, and it felt like a conspiracy to test people and weed out those without the confidence. And she wrote this piece for us, and loads of people got in touch with me saying exactly the same thing happened to me. I got confidence because I went to quite a good school, not amazing, but all right. My parents, in the end, I saw neither of them went to university. My dad went to night school from the age of 18, and he started working for an American company called 3M, which is a big Minnesota company, when he was in his 20s, stayed there the whole time, and gradually got promoted and did better. But he didn't have anything. There was no reason for it. He just worked really hard. And I worked really hard when I was a kid. I used to, on Sunday mornings with my dad, I'd do my homework, he'd do his work, and we'd listen to music together. So I associate work with sitting with my dad and listening to music. And I think what that gave me in the end was just this belief, which I still cling to, is that if you work really hard, nobody knows what they're doing in the world. I mean, the more I advance in the world, the more I feel this really keenly. People in power don't know what they're doing. People in authority don't. So as no one knows what they're doing, you're as good as everybody else. And if you work really hard, if you put the hours in, if you're willing to keep going, you've got a chance. It might not come off. But I say I talk to lots of young people now, and they come in and I try and give them advice. I always say, never look around a table. Never think you're the person who should shut up because they're cleverer than you. No one's cleverer than you. No one knows what they're doing. And I kind of believe, and I think if you have a bit of that belief, it's not to say that you're amazing. It's rather to recognise that everybody's massively flawed. Everyone's struggling. You know, you always imagine other people's lives in this sort of vacuum where they don't get ill and they don't have problems at home, and everything they think of comes off. And of course, nobody lives like that. Everybody is struggling with something, and sometimes those struggles can become overpowering, and sometimes they're not. But I think if you can kind of accept that sort of feet of clay argument that people are all either winging it or struggling at some level, then why shouldn't it be you? You know, why shouldn't it be you? Is a kind of message, I think.
If you have a hang-up or a fear, what would you say it was?
I have an almost debilitating fear of failure.
How does that manifest itself? Do you think about it often?
Yeah, every morning and this isn't. I'm not heralding this as a way to live, because I think it's not particularly healthy. Every day I wake up and the first thing I think about is what might go wrong. I worry about. I've got 3 kids now. I had a surprise third, this year, and so I worry about supporting them. I worry about being a breadwinner. I worry about what would happen if my main source of income dried up, if the place I work ceased to exist. And it's catastrophizing in some ways, but nothing lasts forever either. And you know, I work in an industry, you work in the industry of media, where all sorts of verities are very strongly being challenged now. You don't know the economic model for anything. So it's not impossible that things could go wrong. And also you could say something wrong or do something wrong. But to me, every day, and so I don't say no to some things, and I probably should. You know, I do multiple different other things. I've written a book, I'm writing another one. I do other things as well as my main job, because I don't want to fail. I don't want to. So it's not. I don't know if it's imposter syndrome, because my kind of view is that everyone's an imposter. So it's kind of. Maybe it's imposter syndrome squared, in that we're all an imposter, and therefore it's only by keeping going and working hard and keep trying and doing new things that you'll survive. But there's no moment of repose then. There's no moment of stillness where you think, oh, that went well. And my wife says to me all the time, like, what would success look like? And I have no vision whatsoever of what success and pause looks like. Because whenever you do something, then it either goes well or not quite so well, and you think, what's the next thing? And what happens when you get caught, you know, if someone catches up on you or you get found out? And I don't know, you know, I don't know if you feel the same, but I look forward to retirement. Do you ever think like that, where you think, if I get to 60 and it's all gone okay, then maybe then I can press pause?
Well, I think you're slightly different, because you were so successful so young, not just Cambridge, but after university. You got very senior positions in London very quickly indeed. So your way of thinking is much more advanced. You're thinking about retirement before other people, actually.
Yeah, I do. So I worked at the Press Complaints Commission, which was a very small little body that dealt with.
Was that your first job?
Yeah. So I was 21. I just left home. I got a degree, and I came to London. I entered a job in the Guardian, which said Press Complaints Commission, complaints officer. It was for 18 grand a year. Most junior job in the place, and it was to write decisions for this body, which is it's a sort of, people won't remember it now. It's been replaced by something called IPSO, but it's a self-regulatory body for the newspaper industry, always in always in controversy, always in the news. Because every time a story happens, as you know, the media handling of it is kind of a story. And the British press has many foibles and problems and has done bad things. And so the PCC was often the lightning rod for that. So I came into that at 21. And then by 23, 24, I was the deputy director, and I ended up running it just before the Leveson Inquiry, when it was kind of being shut down.
So you were 24?
So I was 24 when I was deputy director, and I think I became the director when I was 29.
Which is extraordinary. A huge, powerful position in the UK media industry.
Yeah, or a testament to how shoddy the institution is. I mean, it's somewhere between the two of those things. But I did the Leveson Inquiry. So I wrote the Leveson Inquiry, if people don't know, is a big public inquiry into the ethics of the British media. So the PCC was kind of central to it. So I actually wrote the longest submission to the Leveson Inquiry, which I did with one other person. And I kind of think I may have had a mild breakdown because that was a moment where you got to go to a courtroom and it was filmed and it was very much scrutinised and account for what you'd done with your career at a very minor level and more broadly how the institution had served. And I remember thinking, this is hard. I just had a second baby at that point, and then you worry that you're not. I think you want to be in control of things. I think life's, I'm a bit of a control freak, and I think I'd like to be in control, and you can't really be in control of life. And I feel that's probably more the case now than ever, because there's so many sources of stimulus and information, and we're all on social media the whole time, and so we're never this moment of repose, this quietness that I think I kind of seek is never there, and it's getting less likely all the time. And I think I got to the point with Leveson I was worried about that, and then it kind of went all right. But the piece, and I survived, and I went into crisis management of all things. So I used to advise companies about how to deal with the media when they were in crisis. And then The Sun, which was in crisis, the newspaper, because 50 or 40 of their journalists were under arrest or being investigated, needed someone to come in and try and put a framework into the place. So
you became managing editor.
Manager of The Sun, so I was probably 32, 33 when I did that. And that was both exhilarating, and the people were wonderful. I've always found that this is another thing I think is important in life, is if you can get on with people, your colleagues, if you can find teams where you're all happy to just mess around and laugh, and if things are getting stressful, you can joke about it, gallows humour. I find that absolutely critical. Otherwise, I think I would go mad, and I think we'd all go mad. So I found the PCC, tiny little team, The Sun, much bigger, but again, it was embattled. And so that I was there for probably nearly 3 years, and lots of stuff went wrong in terms of having to deal with lots of poor journalists who were their livelihoods were threatened, their lives were threatened in the sense that they could go to jail for. None of them did, thankfully, but that was constant pressure. A very challenging media market where you're having to cut jobs, deal with money. The Sun, more so than most papers, is very brash and loud, so when it makes a mistake, it makes a really big one. It doesn't make small mistakes, it only makes big ones, so you have to try and clear that up. And it was very fun, it was very exhilarating, and then the editor changed, and managing editors kind of have to support the editor, so a new editor came in, so I said, I'll leave, I'll walk away. And then the job at the TLS came up, which is the Times Literary Supplement, this tiny little literary mag, but in my view, with massive potential to kind of take over the world, because I think we live in a time when people value expertise and beauty probably more, because the way they consume information is often so facile and rubbish and challengeable. And so there's an opportunity to do a bit more. So that's where I've ended up. So it's a very strange career. I'm a journalist, I suppose, but I'm not a proper journalist.
So there wasn't a strategy there. You were setting your goals in the near term, were you, each time?
I mean, the goal is survival. I think with everything, the goal is survive, try and do things that interest you, but make enough money to pay a mortgage and have a family, and then carry on surviving. Yeah, I don't think strategic. I try to say this to people now as well. Don't worry too much if you don't have a 20-year plan or a 10-year plan. It might be nice if you know where you want to go to. And actually, in the media job, I think if you're too focused in one area, it's very, very risky, because the media is a massively imperiled industry, and if you're in one, like, newspaper sub-editing, well, there's a very strong likelihood in 5 years' time there won't be any newspapers, or going to be 2 or 3 newspapers. So don't just do that. if you're going to be in the area of journalism, its broadest sense, make sure you can do a piece to camera, or make sure you can edit something for radio, or make sure you can do a podcast, or do everything. Try and do as much as you can, because I kind of see the world as a pretty straight road, but you don't know where the roadblocks are going to be. And so it's probably several roads is the better way of thinking about it. And sometimes there will be blockages ahead. And if you're only focused down one, that's when I think the risk increases. And in some ways, careers are just about managing risk. I mean, life's about managing risk, isn't it? It's about to think, well, is it, where do I put my chips? And I think if you put them all in one place, that's a problem. So you've got to always be thinking of other things.
You obviously feel a lot of pressure from work, and yet you now write books, which is the ultimate amount of pressure, isn't it? Because you're judged by them. They're incredibly hard work. Yeah, just tell us about the books and why you did them and what you've got from them.
It's great, but I mean, and this is because I've always wanted to do. I mean, I grew up in a house so I grew up just before the internet age. So my first email was when I was at university in 1998, and my first phone was when I was 20. So I lived in a house where there was a set number of books, and I read all of them. I read some of them 30 or 40 times. I love books. I love reading. In fact, reading is pretty much the way I keep my mental health balanced to any degree that it is. At the moment, at any one time, I'm reading 3 or 4 different books. I have some that I turn to when I feel particularly stressed, and so it's very important to me, books. So I've always wanted to write one. And then an opportunity came to do it via a publisher, and I wrote a book called How Britain Really Works. It's a kind of explainer for the country. And so I used to go to work at the TLS, get there at 6 in the morning. Literary journalists tend not to start work that early, as you might imagine, so I'd have 6 till 10 where I could do some of my book. And it was 18 months of every day, keep going. And why do it? It's a really good question. I did it because I always wanted to write a book. I thought I could. You want to set up another road in case the roadblocks come, so being a writer, it helps, it gives you stuff. I thought I had something to say. I thought the book hadn't been written by someone else. But maybe having done that, I should have paused for 2 years, but I'm doing another one now. So I don't know.
What's interesting is you have a bit of a negative outlook, but then you're quite positive about breaking through. You haven't given up at any point.
No, and I really feel that I haven't. You're exactly right. I'm quite a glass half empty person, but I do want to believe, and maybe I'm naive, but I do think that if you try and you act in good faith where you can, opportunities do arise. And if you don't get above yourself, I think humility is hugely important. Our industry isn't known for humble people, and it's often known for people who sort of suffer because of that. So I think having a sense of humility and where you are, but having a sense of drive as well. I kind of believe, and I want to believe. And I've got 3 young kids now, and I kind of want to believe it.
Driver.
I want to believe it for them.
Yeah.
That this is a world where there is some form of meritocracy and hard work and kindness. I think kindness. People will say, "Oh, you worked at the Sun, which wasn't very kind," and it had its moments when it wasn't. It had its moments that were as well. But I do think being able to look people in the eye and say, "I've treated you properly," however powerful they are, particularly when they're not powerful, because then you're not doing it for your own ends. That's an absolutely categorically important way of operating. And everyone says nice guys finish second, and I don't want to believe that, actually. I actually think when it comes to jobs or opportunities, people will say, well, how did he treat you? Did you like him? And the answer to that should always be yes, not because you're being strategic, because it's the right thing to do. But I do have this belief. Do you? I mean, do you think that's the way the world works? Or is it naive?
I don't think it's naive. I think, hard work is important, but you do need to I don't believe in luck. I think opportunities come and you create them and actually put yourself.
It is a bit of luck as well, though, isn't it? Surely. I mean,
yeah, but luck, you've got to see the luck.
Yeah, and you've got to be willing to do it. And you've got to eliminate that diffidence. So if someone offers you something, I mean, if you can't do it, you shouldn't do it. I mean, if you genuinely can't do it, then, one of the things I do now, if people call me up and say, do you want to do this talk about something? I always remember that men always say yes to that and women always say no. And you have to ask 3 women before they say yes. You have to ask 1 man, they always say yes. So I now have a rule. If someone calls me and says, oh, we're doing a thing on this author or this thing, do you want to talk about it? If I don't really know about it, I just say no.
Say no.
Because
conscious effort to say no.
To say no, yeah. Actually, why don't you go for this person who genuinely knows what they're talking about? I could probably, everyone can, that's the other thing, everyone can wing anything. So you could always say yes to everything and you'd be all right, I would imagine. That's probably how David Cameron became Prime Minister, if you look at it that way.
Yeah.
So I try not to do that, and I think that's important to say no to things you can't do. But otherwise, you've got to take opportunities. People aren't going to give you stuff, I don't think. I think you're going to have to take it.
One final thought on when you were very young, working on a level with older, very successful people. Did you spot any sort of common characteristics of the way they tackle things? Is there a rule to breaking through, do you think?
No, I think the point is don't be impressed by age. I think that, because I was quite young in London doing things, I think age and ability aren't a very strong correlation. There's a bit of experience, I suppose. So I also took that some people were very good at the job, some people weren't, and just because they'd done it for a long time didn't mean anything in terms of their ability. I saw a lot of people who worried about their kids. That seems to be very striking to me, that you could be very successful in your own self, but you worry that you've given your kids too much or they've got it too easy. I think that's an interesting problem for people who achieve success, that their kids don't know what struggle is and they don't know what lack or want is, and therefore that will impact on them a bit. I saw that quite a lot. You talk to a lot of people in their 50s whose kids are 19, 18, 19, 20 and they don't have a plan, they dropped out of school and I saw that quite a lot. But no, I feel this, I say this to everyone, I really believe this, that the worst thing you can do is sit in a room full of old people and shut up and think they know what they're talking about, because they don't, and they categorically don't. And if they were honest with themselves, they'd admit they don't, but they probably won't. So you should I feel people should have that confidence to try, and it may come off, but it may not. But if you're trying, if you're punting, if you're in the game, then maybe luck does come your way.
Stig, thank you so much.
No, great pleasure.